Hey folks, coming at you with another tying video here. This is one of my favorite streamer patterns, and it's an extremely productive fly for me. It's a miniature single hook variation of Galloup's Barely Legal. A lot of the recipes for these patterns, you end up with a 5 or 6 inch long fly that you can't hardly cast, and nothing wants to eat it. So if you're like me and fishing for kind of smaller water fish and pickier rainbows and such, this is my go-to for those types of situations. So we'll get this off here and go through the materials real quick. First of all, you want to start off with a heavier thread. I'd go at least 140 denier there. We've got some UTC in white. Back hook is going to be a B10s Gamakatsu. I recommend it in sizes 4 to 6 for this fly. For the front shank, I just use a generic streamer hook that I'm going to show you how to cut off. Or if you want to, you can go with the 1 inch articulated fish spine shanks, although they make getting the cone head on a little more difficult later. If you do use a shank articulation wire, we're going to go with Beadalon 19 strand, available at Hobby Lobby, as you can see. Or alternatively, we can use Berkley Firewire in 20 pound. For our cone head, I like to use tungsten in size large, or sometimes I will use the fish school bait fish heads for kind of a fancier production there. And then we're going to go with 2 contrasting colors of Marabou for the top and bottom of the fish body, with ice dub or prism of your choice. Here we got kind of a iridescent olive, and of course a few strands of Krystal Flash of your choice. So we'll get started here. I'm going to go ahead and debarb my hook, so I plan on releasing these fish. I don't like to beat them up any more than we have to. Put your hook in the vise and let's get rolling. And just try to take your time on this. These flies, a lot of times you'll fish them for months and months, or possibly even years, so time right to begin with. Build you a nice consistent thread base there. And we're ready to start tying in our Marabou. And one thing worth noting on your Marabou selection for this fly is I like looking for Marabou that is very wispy, as opposed to some of the woolly, thicker Marabou. The wispy stuff will really let this fly swim and undulate and give it kind of a translucent effect underwater. And another thing I do with regard to preparing the Marabou is I will cut out that middle stem about 1 inch down, so that when I tie it into the hook there, there's no center stem, and it just gives it more freedom to move and wiggle on its own. So just try to compress that where it's easy to handle, and I'll start out with the tail no longer than the length of the hook there. This whole back section of the fly is basically the tail of your bait fish or your streamer, so I keep the tail section pretty short to prevent any kind of short strikes. We want to make sure we get them. And you'll just bundle that Marabou up and wrap it forward. Try to build a little bulk and taper into the body. And cut it off a few hook eyes back. Bundle down those loose ends and return it to the start. Now here I'll tie in a couple strands of Krystal Flash. Give it a little extra sparkle on the back end there. And just capture them on the front side and bring them on round to the far side like so. And then just trim them so they're just a pinch longer than the hairs or the marabou fibers. Bring your thread right back to the start there, and we'll throw in our top stack, which is going to be yellow today. Even it up with the white on the bottom, and just repeat the procedure. Just be careful when you get in here and do this. Don't cut your thread off. I've done that more times than I care to admit. And then bring your thread back on home. We're going to dub us a little ice dub body in there. Now you can always form a dubbing loop to do this for a more durable fly with a more voluminous body. But for the sake of brevity and convenience here, we're just going to do a little dubbing noodle. And this will create a sparser fly with more room to move in the water. So that's one benefit of the noodle over the loop. Although I do employ the loop from time to time. Let's try to build a slight little taper with that dubbing body. And get in there and brush it out before it covers it up with more marabou. And again, we're going to repeat the process of white feather on the bottom and yellow feather on the top. If you don't have a rotary vise, it's more than possible to just tie this on the bottom, but if you do, you just flip your hook upside down there. It makes it a little easier. And again, try to keep your feather lengths the same for all your stacks. And secure that marabou. And trim it off. And we'll go back on top with our yellow stack. And again, you can see these marabou tufts are pretty light. I try to keep this fly pretty sparse and minimal, again, so that it has plenty of room to swim and move underwater. Tie that all down good and make yourself a nice little head on the back end of this fly. And I like to throw a double whip finish on it, make things nice and secure. And there is the back end of your fly. Now we're going to cut ourselves a little piece of Beadalon to make the articulation here. Just got to use my wire cutters. Cut myself about a 4-inch piece. I'll kind of bend it in half and kink it. And then thread it through the hook eye of your back end. Like so. Now we got to create this front shank by bending this hook and cutting it off. So if you have a pair of needle nose pliers or barb mashing pliers, we'll go back here roughly the length of the shank of your B10s, and we'll just fold it forward on a block of wood or something so you don't stab yourself. Like so. And then grab your wire cutters again and just nip that off. So you got a little post to stick in your vise there. And I much prefer this to using the pre-made shanks, because you can thread your cone head right on there, no problems. Get that secured in your vise, and you're ready to go at the front end. Just get your thread started again. And again, make a nice even thread body all the way back. And we're ready to tie in our back end. Now, I usually just tie what's tied in where it's comfortable to grab it with a few wraps, and then you can adjust it. And I like keeping the loop pretty small where it stays rigid and allows that back end of the fly to really jackknife around and swim. So we'll go ahead and tie this in about halfway. And this is usually when I add a little bit of super glue here. I'm pretty sure you could get by without it, but like I say, sometimes you'll fish these flies for a long time, so you might as well build them good and sturdy from the get-go. And go ahead and trap those two wires next to each other on the top of the shank. Try to keep everything nice and uniform. Then I'll take and bend them forward and capture that loop up towards the inside of the cone head. That helps build a little bit of bulk on the inside of that cone head, which helps you later on. You should be left with a little bit extra wire there. Just go ahead and nip it off. And wrap over your wire and capture it. Just be careful sometimes if your wire gets cut off a little jagged, it can actually fray your thread. And now you're back to the rear of your shank, and you're ready to commence with the stacking. And we'll just put this white feather right on the bottom here. This is probably the most difficult part of this fly, is getting that white feather on the back of the front shank. You got the vise in your way. Even if you spin it upside down, it's not too cooperative. Let's try that again. That looks like it'll work. And again, just try to wrap that bulk forward and create a nice smooth body with it. And cut it off just a little forward or a little behind the cone head there. And flip her back over. And again, yellow stack on the top. Try to keep it about the same length as that white on the bottom. And we'll bring that dubbing body forward again. And again, give it a little brush out. And one more stack. Another yellow feather on the top. And then if you tie this with the cone head and not the bait fish head, you always have the problem of this little exposed collar right here. And you can deal with that a couple of ways. You can always make a little dubbing worm right there. And wrap it over and brush it out like so. But I've been known to make a dubbing loop right here. So I can build that front collar out of Marabou. We'll do a little move like this. Kind of preen those fibers back. And bring it forward. And that'll kind of hide that unsightly naked thread collar on the front end. Just sneak a little whip finish back in there. Or a couple of them. And that, my friends, is your finished miniature single hook variant of a barely legal. And one last step you want to remember to do while you're still at your tying vise is to cut that little nubbin off. And that'll really maximize its movement. You can see there you have a pretty sparse, pretty wiggly little miniature streamer pattern. Clocking in at about 3 inches. And you can fish this thing on the jig, on the strip, on the swing, or on the drift, you name it. They take it different ways on different days. So enjoy tying this up, and happy fishing. Take care.